Om Tavakatamratam Tapta Jivanam Kaviviridhitam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadadatam Bhuvigananti Bhurirajana. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome everyone to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We are on the chapter Advice to the Brahmos. This is Sunday, April 8th, 1883. And we are in Sri Ramakrishna's room. If you'll remember, of course, I wasn't here last week. Swami Brahmananji filled in for me. But before that, we stopped. Adhar Sen had come with one of his friends, actually with several friends, but one of them had just recently suffered the death of his eldest son. And we just got to the point where Sri Ramakrishna was going to address that. Now, I don't know if this is a happy coincidence or an unhappy coincidence. Some of you may know that the reason I wasn't here last Friday was that my mother became very ill and she actually passed away. So I've also been thinking about death and the transitory nature of life and different things like that. So on some level, this is a very appropriate section for us to read. We know that people react to death, and also people react to those who are mourning in different ways. And so many people have contacted me and have wished me well and shared, given condolences and everything. I'm very appreciative to everyone. But we see with these great souls how they have different ways of dealing with these things. I remember there was an incident regarding Holy Mother. A woman had come, I think a young child had died. And everyone was watching Holy Mother. What would she do? What would she say to this woman? And they were thinking maybe she'll say that, oh, this is the nature of life, what can we do? That everything is transitory, we shouldn't be attached. But Holy Mother was silent. She didn't say anything. And then they saw that some tears started coming from her eyes. And she just, somehow this removed the grief of this woman, this Holy Mother sharing in her grief. So people have different ways of helping others get over that period of grief. We'll see Sri Ramakrishna does something that's even more surprising. He takes a very strong militant attitude towards death. This was actually the last thing that we read last time, but I'll start with this. It's the top of page 209. By this time, Sri Ramakrishna had become better acquainted with Adhar, who related the cause of his friend's grief. Now, the very interesting thing is that Adhar Sen will also die shortly after this. It says, there's a footnote, 18 months after this conversation. So everything that Thakur is saying about death here has relevance to Adhar, although Adhar, of course, didn't know. Thakur must have known. He must have, and the other thing is that Adhar Sen was so anxious at this time to get help from his friends. He had applied for a very high position. He was a deputy magistrate, which was also a high position. But Thakur kept telling him, don't get too involved with this, be content with what you have, it's a good job and everything, devote your time to God. Thakur must have had some presentiment that Adhar would not live long also. So all of this is for the benefit mainly of Adhar's friend, but also for him as well. This was, I think, only the second visit, first or second visit of the author. By this time, Sri Ramakrishna had become better acquainted with Adhar, who related the cause of his friend's grief. The master sang, as if to himself, to arms, O man! Death storms your house in battle array. Bearing the quiver of knowledge, mount the chariot of devotion. Bend the bow of your tongue with the bowstring of love, and aim at him the shaft of Mother Kali's holy name. Here is a ruse for the fray. You need no chariot or charioteer. Fight your foe from the Ganges bank, and he is easily slain. Then he said, what can you do? Be ready for death. Death has entered the house. You must fight him with the weapon of God's holy name. Death, we have to face this prospect of death in two different ways. One is our own death, and the other is the death of loved ones. For many people, the first one is the tough one. Many people don't bother too much about their own life, sometimes worrying more about how it affects other people. And some people are ready. My mother was 96. She was ready. She was ready to go. And as sadhus, we're supposed to be ready at any moment. The Thakur says in some places that we should all think about death, but the sadhu especially, at all times, he says. Remember death at all times. That means remember the transitory nature of the world. There's so many traditions of sadhus going to cremation grounds to meditate. Shiva, he's supposed to spend all of his time there. And to dwell on this idea that this world is of 2 days only, dudin. Thakur uses this expression, that it's a very transitory thing. One of my favorite hymns is Bhaja Govindam. Bhaja Govindam of Shankaracharya. We hear the title and we think it'll be a devotional hymn that worship God, Bhaja Govindam, but it's all about death. It's all of the story is that Shankaracharya saw a very old man sitting in Benares near the Ganga on one of the steps in the bathing ghat, reciting the rules of Panini, like a young student would memorize the grammatical rules. So he composed this hymn, this is the story, out of compassion for him, that when the moment of death comes, then what good will this do? The Dukrin Karane, the Panini rules, nahi rakshati Dukrin Karane, they won't save us. So he says that worship the Lord, but if you read the poem, it's really saying, remember death, remember the transitory nature of the world. The dinaya minyo sayam prataha, day comes, night comes, the seasons come, everything, morning and evening, sunrise, sunset, this is the nature of life. That and it goes so quickly. The time is a very strange thing. When we get to the final day, then it won't make any difference if we've lived 100 years or 50 years or 10 years. Mashima, yeah.
How do you then function if you always think about the death, I mean your death, self-death? How, not about how it reacts to the other people. How do you function in life? Every minute?
We appreciate every minute. Yeah, what does this do? Does it leave us morbid? Does it leave us kind of paralyzed and helpless? It should be the opposite. If we realize that this life is very short, we should cherish every moment, and we should not waste any moment. We should constantly think that how precious the time is, that we should spend our time calling on God, doing our spiritual practice. This should really be that wake-up call for us, that we may find that, oh, the last day has come, and what did I do? I wasted my life. So this should give us some perspective, some seriousness with regard to spiritual life. Swamiji quotes a verse, I don't know where it's from. It says, when you do spiritual practice, you should feel as if Yama is holding the tuft of hair in your head. That means at any time ready to take you to death. If we think this is the last day of our life, then will we waste it? What will we do? Of course, some people say, okay, let me enjoy everything, do whatever I can last minute. Others will say, no, let me prepare for death. There's a very nice expression, Puntli bandhe bosheachi. I bundled my things, I packed my bags, and I'm sitting here waiting. I'm ready. So we should be ready. That means that there shouldn't be any regrets, that I've taken care of everything. I don't have any more desires. That, if I only had another day, I could do this, I could do that. If I had another day, I could get my things in order. We should get everything in order. And so that if the time comes, because we don't know when that call will come. Nobody knows. We should be ready for it. It's not a morbid thing. Really, for a sadhu especially, death is the reward. What is our concept of death? Either it's the end of this suffering, and it's a Buddhist idea, this nirvana, that just the flame goes out. So nothing to feel bad about if that's the case. Otherwise, if we lead a good life, then there won't be anything to worry about. We don't know exactly, it's a mystery. We don't know exactly what happens. We're reborn, we go to a heaven, we merge in God. We don't know exactly what happens. There's so many different theories. But the one nice thing that we read in Gita, that there's no durgati. Nothing bad will happen if we lead a good life. For the kalyana krit, if someone is a good person, then there's nothing to worry about. Some positive thing will be there, whatever it is. We go to Ramakrishna Loka, good. We're reborn in a pious family, we get to serve Thakur Ma again, good. There's nothing to worry about, nothing to feel bad about. Is this world such a wonderful place that we want to cling to it? How much suffering there is, and even bodily suffering, mental suffering, everything. So it's good if we take a good hard look at life, and it really, I'm going to repeat it again, it's not a morbid idea. It's not that, it's horrible, I have to get out, but it's something to look forward to. I feel that, honestly, that it's something to look forward to. And this idea of length of life, the final day comes, it won't make any difference. That final day is going to come for everybody. And when it comes, it's going to be like, how did it come so fast? This idea of time is so strange that it takes a long time to get through a day, but the last 50 years went by like nothing, 70 years, whatever it is. So this is the nature of time. See, in Sanskrit, this word, kala, it means time, it means death, it means God. Is a name for Shiva. Look at that, all three things. Who is it that when Arjuna wants to know, in chapter 11, this vision of the universal form, that who are you? Who's this universal form that I'm saying, who can withdraw everything? And he says, I'm Kala, I'm time. So Sri Krishna is saying in that form of the destroyer Shiva, Kala is the name of Shiva. So the name of God, and it's a name of time, of course, and a name of death. So everything is born in time, everything is destroyed in time, everything gets withdrawn, and it goes just like that. And the older we get, the faster it goes. So there should be solace in this idea. If we can really feel, not that we're rushing towards it or anxious, but it's kind of, we expect there to be some reward at the end. If we lead a good life, and if we haven't achieved the goal, there'll be another opportunity. that there's some type of justice in the universe. It seems to be so random, and it seems to be the cruel and heartless world, and we don't know why some people suffer and other people don't suffer. But ultimately, there's some justice. There should be, huh? There should be something that makes sense out of all of this. But Thakur is saying now that we have to really be strong about it. Now, when it's the death of a loved one, it's more difficult, because there's the feeling of loss and grief and all of that. Especially if it's a child, huh? Then the whole lifetime you mourn for a child. If it's a parent who's led a good life, and a good long life, and it's time to go and everything, then there's some feeling of comfort. Now they're free from the body, free from suffering and everything. It's not a bad thing that way. But for someone who loses a small child, it's a terrible thing. So this life is very cruel. We don't know why. We can have big theories of karma, big theories of, oh, this is how God's grace works, turns our mind toward God, with all these different theories, but we really don't know, except that really this living this life has to be done with great care. It's really like navigating through a snake pit. We just don't know. We take a false step, and we have a little pride, and the mind goes in a different direction. Or we lead a perfectly good life, and yet something happens. It's out of our control. It's a very strange thing. Really, the more I contemplate these things, the more convinced I am that I don't understand anything. This mystery of this life. It just seems more and more mysterious. This is why I like these poems of Kamalakanta, Ram Prasad and things. That what is that one? Though I've thought about these things for my whole life, still I become mad trying to understand these things. It's Calling My Mother Really Black, that beautiful song, the last song that Swamiji sang, and the last day of his life, when he left the shrine that early morning, and they heard him singing that song of Kamalakanta. So what do we know of God? What do we know of this world? What do we know of life and death? We don't know much at all.
Excuse me, Swamiji?
Yeah.
Has Swamiji said that if somebody leaves the body in Belur, they also get moksha?
We don't know. Well, see, we read all of these things. If we die in a certain place, if we die in Belur Math, and because of the holy atmosphere in the holy place, that the mind is thinking of that, then we can get liberation. If we die anywhere and there are no desires in the mind, we can get liberation. If we die in a holy place and the mind is filled with desires and we have bad karma, then we'll be born again.
There's no blanket. Like in Varanasi, there is a blanket, right? That anybody.
This is what they say. Anybody who dies in Varanasi, but at the same time, if anyone has any desire, they'll be reborn. So we have this idea that if you die there, that because of the holy atmosphere, or the presence of Shiva and Annapurna, because of the presence of the divine presence, that at the final moment, no desire will come into the mind. Thakur had that vision, of course, that Divine Mother is untying the chains, and Shiva himself is whispering the mantra in the ear of the dying person. But it's really hard to say. So we don't need to know all of these things. We need to have some conviction that leading a spiritual life will be the best possible life we can live, and that there'll be something that we'll get something out of it. Both. Even if we don't get something out of it, the best possible life. But we should have that conviction that we'll get something out of it. It won't be in vain. Nothing will be wasted. If we lead a good life, if we lead an unselfish life, if we lead a life dedicated to God and to serving God in humankind, that there'll be a reward that we get through that work. We'll feel. Swamiji, that his famous statement, "They alone live who live for others. The rest are more dead than alive." So it's not that if you lead a selfless life, you'll get God realization. He's not saying that. He's saying if you lead a selfless life, that you'll feel alive. That's its own reward. That we don't have to look for anything. If we look for something else after that, then it's not motiveless work. We're looking for some reward out of it. If we do it just out of goodness, then we'll feel the tremendous joy will come from that. I had the great blessing of watching my mother for all of these years. She lived to be 96. She was the most selfless person I've ever met. And you could see that she never thought of herself. And it was always, if others are happy, she was happy. A remarkable thing. Yeah, really, in that way, she was really quite a saintly person, but very simple and nothing with philosophy or anything like that. No idea at all that, I'll get God realization, I'll go to heaven. Nothing at all. This was just her nature. If others are happy, she was happy. It was really a great blessing to have a mother like that. So,
The rock.
she was the rock. She was the rock of the family. Yeah. So we should be prepared for death. We should be ready for death. And not that this life is so horrible, we want to get out of it, but it's also not so wonderful. And we should realize that it's nothing to cling to. It's nothing to cling to, and death will come. No matter how much we don't want it to come, or we can postpone it as long as we want. There are people, it's really shocking. There are people, in their 90s, even 100 or something, that say, yes, do whatever you can to keep me alive. That the feeding tube, okay, I don't mind. That the oxygen, I don't mind. What did they gain? An extra day, an extra 2 days? More suffering and everything? So my mother was very clear. No hospital, no resuscitation, no feeding tube, nothing. She was ready, and we were all ready, and everyone was by her side, and this is a wonderful type of death, if we can all have that type of death. But in spiritual life, it's very good for us to just remember that that day will come for all of us. It will come as certain as anything is certain in this world. And either we're ready for it or we're not ready for it. If we're not ready for it now, will we be ready for it in 50 years? And ready for it means that we're ready at that final moment to let the mind dwell in God and to long for union with God, because that'll determine, that final moment will determine what happens to us in whether there's another lifetime or whatever it is. And if we don't prepare the mind, and that doesn't mean that I'm preparing the mind so that I'll think of God at the final moment. It means I'm thinking about it now. Unless we do it now, it won't come at the final moment. The idea is not that we can trick God. The final moment I'll think, it's not like, I'll call my son Narayana. We hear that story all of the time. And then I'll get liberation. No, if we have to train the mind to think of God at all times, or to at least be aware of that divinity within, and the transitory nature of the world. It's very helpful. This Bhajo Govindam is such a wonderful, wonderful hymn. And Thakur, we'll see so many times he'll talk about this idea that we have to be prepared, or really, if the call comes, there are people that work certain types of jobs that at any time they can be called to go someplace else. They do disaster relief or something like that. they'll always keep a bag packed. So if they get that phone call that get on the plane, you have to go here, you have to go there, their bag is packed, they're ready to go. So we should be like that. Puntli bente bosheachi. My bag is packed and I'm ready to go. I've bundled up my things, I'm waiting for the call. So it's a very beautiful idea. So then he goes on. Thakur first he says, what can you do? Be ready for death. Death has entered the house. You must fight him with the weapon of God's holy name. And then he goes back to this idea, God alone is the doer. Now, we can take this all in two different ways. One, that, I'm just an instrument, that God is doing it. But the other way, that's a very high ideal. Thakur will talk about that, of course. He loves that ideal. But this is for somebody who really, the ego is completely effaced. For us, we can say that no matter what I do, I know that the results are not in my hands. No matter what I do. I can try my best and cover all of the bases and make sure that I've looked at every possible detail. And once I've done it, I expect a certain result. Opposite thing happens. I don't know why. It happened. This is not, I have no adhikara for this in the language of Gita. That we can't have any attachment to the fruits of our action. So from that point of view, we can say, I've done what I've done, now it's in the hands of God. That's all. Or karma, or however we understand it, but it's out of my hands. So, but Thakur uses this type of language, that God alone is the doer. I say, O Lord, I do as thou doest through me. I speak as thou speakest through me. I am the machine and thou art the operator. I am the house and thou art the indweller. I am the engine and thou art the engineer. Now, Thakur tells this to everybody, but as an ideal. He doesn't expect anybody to follow this teaching and at the same time be full of ego and pride and full of desires. This is really meant for somebody who is trying to practice this egoless idea, that I'm not doing anything for myself. If I do things just for the sake of righteousness, I follow dharma. I do what the heart tells me is the right thing to do. Then I can say I'm being inspired by God, led by God. God is the real doer. Then, otherwise, I'm the doer. I can't do all sorts of nonsense and say, well, God was the real doer. Otherwise, I am the doer. So if we efface the ego, then we can do it. So he says, give your power of attorney to God. So this is the in-between thing. Yes, I have this feeling that I'm the one responsible for everything, but let me try to feel that, okay, I'm really not the one who's allowed to make this decision. Let God make that decision for me. The power of attorney. That suppose you give your power of attorney to somebody and you change your mind, say, I want to do it this way. They say, no, I have your power of attorney and you're going to make a big mistake here. I'm going to do it this way and you'll thank me one day for this. So Thakur says, if you give your power of attorney to a good person, you'll never regret it. So in order to practice this, we have to get rid of every last ounce of personal desire and of ego and pride and all of the things that generally are the impulse for action. That verse I like so much from Gita, when Arjuna asked Sri Krishna, why do we do things we shouldn't do? Why do we do sinful things? When we know we shouldn't do it and we don't even want to do it, as if we're forced to do it. Now, if he's asking that, will Sri Krishna say to him, oh, you're not the actor, the Divine Mother is actually doing these sinful things? No. He says it's the force of kama and krodha. Kama, krodha. This, all of the, he says it from rajas, tamas and rajas, that there's all of the desires and passions are making us do things that even we don't want to do it. That means I know that the right thing is to be unselfish. I know the right thing is to apologize to somebody, but I can't do it. Why can't I do it?
Yoga said that, right? He knows what's right, but he can't.
Yes, that's also another verse from Mahabharata. Yeah. But that, he says, I do as you make me do. This is different. This is we're doing as the passions are making us do. This is that lack of freedom that we have when we're not able to withstand the force of the lower passions. Sri Krishna specifically says kama and krodha. There's a desire and anger, but it could be any of them. So if we can transcend those things and become very sattvic and pure in nature, then we can have some concept, some idea that God alone is the real doer. Now, from a very high point of view, God alone dwells within all beings. There is no I. There is no individual I if we analyze, and Thakur will talk about that. So how can I say that I'm the doer? But as long as we have this feeling of I, we have to be responsible for what we do. We'll get all of that. Let me go on here. So give your power of attorney to God. One doesn't come to grief through letting a good man assume one's responsibilities. Let his will be done. So we do it with our best. We try our best to do what we think is right, and then accept what comes as the will of God. This is slightly different. I'm not saying that God alone was the actor who did it. I did it, but it wasn't the will of God that it turned out the way I thought it would turn out. A little bit different attitude. We can practice that attitude. This attitude that I'm just a machine and God is the operator. We have to get rid of every last drop of ego to have that attitude. Thakur could do it. Why? He said, just as you scrape out the inside of a pumpkin, you know, it has all of the seeds that you get rid of, and then it has the little threads that come. You scoop all of that out. It's perfectly smooth inside. He said that's the way he was. That's the way we have to be if we want to be really free from this ego. Then what can dwell inside except God? That's the practical side of all of this. Otherwise, we can say, yes, God alone dwells within all beings. But this sense of ego covers it all, gives this feeling of individuality. We want to get rid of even this false notion of the I. Because this false notion of the I is very strong, it's very powerful, this I sense. Then he goes on, but isn't your grief for your son only natural? The son is one's own self reborn. Atmaja is a very nice term. And we find that parents very often live through their children. Things that they couldn't succeed in or they couldn't get, they want the children to be able to get. And this is how they live. It's not bad. It's also a type of selflessness, that they're happy at the happiness of their children. So it's a natural thing. This is what Thakur calls Maya, which is, it has a good side and a bad side. The good side is that there is a great and affection, but a little bit of attachment that goes for the parents to the children. But at the same time, if that same feeling can be expanded so that we feel that to everyone, then it becomes daya, it becomes a very good thing. So these are two concepts, Maya and daya, that are diametrically opposed to each other only at the extremes. If we see the point at which they merge into each other, we see that they're very similar. So when that love for our very close, near and dear ones, our family, our friends and everything, expands a little bit, then expands a little bit more. So to our people of our own country, expands a little bit more. And then finally we get to all beings. Then we see that, it's changed. Now it's no longer Maya, because Maya can bind us through that attachment, and Daya can free us. So it's not something that is really different in nature, but it's limited and restricted and individual and not universal. When it becomes universalized, then it can free us. The son is one's own self reborn. Lakshmana ran to Ravana when the latter fell dead on the battlefield. Looking at Ravana's body, he found that every one of his bones was full of holes. Thereupon he said to Rama, "O Rama, glory be to your arrows. There's no spot in Ravana's body that they have not pierced." "Brother," replied Rama, "the holes you see in his bones are not from my arrows. Grief for his sons has pierced them through and through. These holes are the marks of his grief. It has penetrated his very bones." Now, Thakur, he's consoling the devotee. One way of consoling people is by showing that you're not alone. This has happened to other people. That many people have had to go through this, and this is just one of the possible facts of life, that these things happen. But house, wife, and children are all transitory. They have only a momentary existence. The palm tree alone is real. One or two fruits have dropped off. Why lament? In the Gita, we have this expression, chapter 2, that occurs, I don't know how many times, 4, 5, 6 different times, that Sri Krishna, he's talking about the death of Arjuna's loved ones that hasn't taken place yet. Huh? That he's saying that, yeah, you go into battle, and the good chance that they'll die in that battle, but he's saying, he gives all these reasons, and he says, therefore you should not grieve. Huh? Or there's no reason to grieve because of that. Now, grief is something that plays a very important role. We shouldn't think, if we grieve over a loved one, that we're doing it uselessly. What Sri Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna is that don't be too attached to this what you're seeing, just this physical body. And grief is really at our feeling of loss. So it's okay to grieve our feeling of loss, but don't think that anybody's died or you've killed anybody. That only the body is no longer there. It was very interesting. I'll share a little bit of a personal thing. With my mother, we had a nurse there at the time, and they have to give the actual time of death. Now I'm there, and right by my mother's side, holding her hand, and I see she took her last breath. Yeah? And the nurse comes and feels the pulse. There's still some pulse. Yeah? So, the death of the body, there's still some prana is still there.
Yes.
Huh? Prana is still there. That's how they measure death. When even there's no pulse and the prana is completely functionless. We say it's left the body, but there's no longer function of the body. Even then, there'll be some cellular change in things that will take place.
Warmth could be there in the body.
And some warmth. So it happens after what we call death. There's a slow process when the functions, and the bodily heat leaves and all of that. But from my point of view and the others, that last breath will be, and even before that, when the loved one is in a state where there's no evident awareness of anything. Eyes are open but glazed over. Now maybe they can hear something. We don't know. Soul could have left the body. We don't know what the condition is at that time. But it's not something that you can measure by this idea of pulse in the body or any functioning of prana, anything like that. They're two different things. So these are great mysteries. Of course, closely related. We can't say they're not related, but how we look upon death and what happens and who is the real person, who is the real self. It's not the body. It's not the body.
So Swamiji, you said that the prana leaves gradually, not at once.
It depends if we think of prana as breath. There's a final breath. But for the nurse, that wasn't enough. We still feel a little bit of pulse. So the lungs are not working, but Maybe the heart is, or blood is still going through the veins somehow. I don't know. It seemed to me so irrelevant. That at the time of her passing, we will take to be more with the last breath. But it was within a couple of minutes after that. No, we don't feel any pulse anymore. But it was curious to me how they need this scientific definition. Because of this materialistic view of things. Not that the nurse was materialistic. She was a wonderful person, very highly spiritual person, very loving and everything. But this is just the way they have to define it, I guess. God is engaged in three kinds of activity: creation, preservation, and destruction. We talk about this Trimurti, the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, each one is responsible. This is just our way of saying that there are three different cosmic functions, not that there are three different deities that are doing all of this. That this is what we call Ishvara, or God, a personal God, or creator God, will have all of these functions. Death is inevitable. So that which is born will die. This is chapter 2 of the Gita. This is why it's chanted at the time of death when someone is passing. We generally will, or the funeral service, memorial service, chant from chapter 2 about this, that which is born will die. This is inevitable. And a very nice sentiment we find in Gita also: if something is inevitable, we shouldn't grieve over it. Because grief is a little bit of regret. Oh, if only I could have done something different, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. But if it's inevitable, then we shouldn't think like that. It would have happened. So many people feel guilt at the time of death. Oh, if I only had done this, if I hadn't done that, if we hadn't tried to do this surgery, or if we had done this instead of that, and this guilt comes. But death is inevitable. And we don't know why and how it happens. Is prarabdha karma. This is a concept that we may accept literally, we may not. But the concept is that our days are numbered. That we're born and we have a certain number of breaths that we'll take. And it's not accidental when we die. Now, Holy Mother and Thakur, they weren't very strict about this idea. They said if you have great devotion, then this prarabdha karma can be changed. It's not such a strict thing. But they accepted the concept of it. Instead of a sword going through you, you'll get a pinprick. But length of life, we don't know. We see people who seem perfectly healthy, they die a heart attack instantly. Other people have such poor health, and they go on and on and on and on. We don't know why. So we have this idea, this prarabdha karma, that because of what was done in previous lifetimes, that we're born destined to lead a certain number of days in this lifetime. I don't have much conviction regarding these things. I don't question them. I don't feel it's necessary for us to say either yes, I completely believe in this, or I think it's nonsense. This is one of those things that to me is a very secondary thing. We don't know why and how things happen. That's enough for me. And Thakur emphasizes that so many times. He said, who can understand the ways of God? And why do you try to figure it out? These things can't be understood by this ordinary human mind. And even after God realization, we still might not understand these things. That this is a mysterious world. This is why we say that everything is in the hands of Mahamaya. That means that everyone is deluded by this Maya, and we don't know exactly, we don't have good answers for everything, or even for anything, good answers. So we muddle along with this, at least this conviction that if I can't understand all of these things, then I'll leave them aside, and I'll do what I think is important in this lifetime. That means I'll try to lead a good life, an unselfish life, a life of sincerity and seriousness. And if there's something to be realized in this life, that we see these great souls who have realized something and tell us this is how you do it, and then I'll devote my life to that. Thakur says that don't worry too much. Jadu Malek was a very wealthy man. Thakur always used him as an example. That don't ask too many questions. How much money does he have? How much land does he own? All of this. Try to meet him. Then if you like, you can ask him. If he likes, he may tell you. He may not. You may not care at that point. Huh? Thakur never said that after we realize God, we'll know the answer to all of these questions. He never said that. He always said, who can understand? If he says who can understand, then what chance do we have of understanding these things? All will be destroyed at the time of dissolution. So he's talking about now this whole cycle of creation, but of course it means individually. That's samashti and vyashti. And the universal cosmic aspect, the whole universe is projected and then the whole universe is withdrawn. And of course the idea in Vedanta is that it goes on and on and on, cycle after cycle. But for the individual, we're born, we'll also die. This is also part of that divine plan. Death is inevitable. All will be destroyed at the time of dissolution. Nothing will remain. At that time, the Divine Mother will gather up the seeds for the future creation. Even as the elderly mistress of the house keeps in her hodgepodge pot little bags of cucumber seed, sea foam, blue pills, and other miscellaneous things, the Divine Mother will take her seeds out again at the time of the new creation. This is also true as an individual, that all of our karma, that's also kept there. That all of our samskaras, all of these things, and this will determine what type of future life we have. Now, this is all with regard to Adhar Sen's friend. Now, Thakur will start talking to Adhar, and he'll start giving him advice, which also, now that we understand that he only has 1.5 years left to live, it has a different meaning for us. So, Master to Adhar. Sri Ramakrishna began to talk with Adhar on the veranda north of his room. Master to Adhar. You are a deputy magistrate. He was a young man. I don't know how old, 30 or in his 30s, I think, at that time. And a very good position. You are a deputy magistrate. Remember that you have obtained your position through the grace of God. Do not forget him. But remember that all men must one day walk down the same path. That means death. There's a footnote. Adhar Sen passed away 18 months after this conversation. At the news of his death, the master wept before the mother a long time. We say, yeah, you shouldn't grieve. How Thakur grieved. And Holy Mother. That I forget who it was who passed away, but Holy Mother said she couldn't leave her bed for 3 days. One of the direct disciples or something. They all grieved terribly. Because their hearts were so pure, and they had so much love, and this attachment to pure souls, and the attachment that pure souls have is much greater than our attachment, because we have our selfishness. They only feel the goodness of the other person, and it's only this pure love that they have. So their attachment is far greater than ours, but it's a perfectly sattvic type of attachment. We shouldn't even call it attachment. This is pure love. But they'll grieve. They'll grieve. When Thakur passed away, Holy Mother really, she had no desire to live even. And grief was so great. All the direct disciples, how they wandered this. And Thakur knew. He said, the only reason I'm not giving up this body is I know when I pass away, you'll wander around the streets weeping for me. So don't think that spiritual people don't grieve and mourn. But it's different. They don't do it because of any selfish idea, and they don't do it because of any materialistic idea that this person is actually dead. They may see when Thakur's nephew, Akshay, died. First, he said, I laughed because I knew this body is just a sheath. It's nothing, a pillowcase. And the soul, I could see leaving the body, laughing. It was a joyful thing. But he said, but the next day, how my heart was just being torn apart in grief for Akshay. And he said, then I understood how much worldly people will suffer of grief. As if Divine Mother was trying to give me this experience to understand that. So he's saying that, at the news of his death, the Master wept before the Mother a long time. There was a great devotee of Sri Ramakrishna who referred to him as his own relative. So he said, do not forget him to Adhar, but remember that all men must one day walk down the same path. We stay in this world only a couple of days. Really, I marvel sometimes when I think of the past at how strange it seems. Many of us feel this way. Is it possible that I've lived over 70 years? Is it possible? Does it make sense? Or does it have any meaning? The time and age and everything. And when that final day comes, does it make any difference how many days passed before that? It is all this, really, the time is Maya. Thakur says that time is Maya. So we stay in this world only a couple of days. This world is our field of activity. They call it the karma bhumi. The karma bhumi. This is where we get to work out our karma. We're not here for enjoyment. If there's a place we're born for enjoyment, it'll be some other loka or something, then we come back here. This is where we're supposed to get rid of our desires. We're supposed to purify the heart. We're supposed to develop this unselfishness and this love of God. This is the field of action. We fulfill our worldly duties and we do our spiritual practice. And we try to do it all without any attachment, do everything as an offering. This world is our field of activity. We are born here to perform certain duties. People have their homes in the country, but come to Calcutta to work. We should feel this is not our home. This is another idea. This brings great vairagya, that we're just here for a short visit. We've been exiled. We've been exiled here. And we have to fulfill our duty here, then we can go back home. Our home is God. We can go back if we've done all that we need to do here. It is necessary to do a certain amount of work. This is a kind of discipline, but one must finish it speedily. So whatever karmic responsibilities we have, we should do that. In the Indian tradition, it's a very nice idea that after reaching a certain age, the son takes responsibility for the family and for earning money and everything. And the parents can retire. They can go into the forest and they can devote all of their time to spiritual life. So they fulfill their duties and then they can turn their mind completely to God. While melting gold, the goldsmith uses everything. The bellows, the fan, and the pipe, so that he may have the hot fire he needs to melt the metal. After the melting is over, he relaxes and asks his attendant to prepare a smoke for him. All this time his face has been hot and perspiring, but now he can smoke. So this has to do with worldly duties and also spiritual practice. This is very much like the idea of the boatman who has to work very hard to get his boat out and then raise the sail and then he sits back. Both times they can get a smoke. Thakur uses that example. So it means that finish our worldly duties, then turn our mind to God, number one. And also it means do hard spiritual practice until we reach that point where we can practice perfect sharanagati. Surrender to God. Then we don't have to do anything. When we've reached that point where we've just turned ourselves over to God. Now do whatever you want with me. I'm in your hands. I have no personal desire for anything, for enjoyment or anything else. That I just want to take refuge with you, take shelter with you. You place me wherever you want, just like the small kitten, wherever the mother cat puts it, it's content and it's happy. This is that anuraga state. After the Vaidhi Bhakti, then there's anuraga state that Thakur calls this the very final step of the ladder, and that rosy color of dawn, just before the sun rises, if we can reach that state. But we don't do it by just talking about it. This is something that we in Gita, it's a very nice verse that says, no one attains to nice karma, to worklessness, by giving up work. We don't get to that state where we transcend work by giving up work. We get to it by doing work, by fulfilling it. We don't get to this sharanagati state unless we do our sadhana. We do our spiritual practice first. If anyone is born with this sharanagati, then they must have done something in the previous life, that they don't have to do much. Thakur says, kripa siddha. Otherwise, we won't get to that nice karma unless we do hard work, do our spiritual practice with great fervor and great longing. See, one must have stern determination. Then alone is spiritual practice possible. One must make a firm resolve. So forget about all this stuff that I do as God makes me do. For now, that we have to say, no, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to do it. This purushakara, this has to come first. And this feeling of strength and boldness. Swamiji emphasized that so much. Thakur also, he said you have to work hard. And you have to have great determination. Kubrok chai. He says it's grit. That whatever it takes, I'm not going to give up. We have to have that in spiritual life. Otherwise, obstacles will come and we'll say, okay, it wasn't worth it. It's too difficult. Then we don't gain anything. There is great power in the seed of God's name. It destroys ignorance. A seed is tender and the sprout soft. Still it pierces the hard ground. The ground breaks and makes way for the sprout. We see sometimes, even in the pavement, concrete, that there'll be a little weed or something, it'll crack right through it. We have them all over our parking lot. How it does it is not getting any sun even. It is underground, and still it has a tremendous strength. So if that's true for this little weed, think of the name of God. It seems like, repeating the name of God, what can it do? We're repeating something over and over and over again. We have no idea the power to break through that. Swamiji in one place says it's like corrosive acid. You can take the hardest steel and you put a little of this corrosive acid, it'll eat its way through all the way, slowly, 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 until it gets all the way through, breaks through. So this is the name of God, is like that. The mind becomes very much distracted if one lives long in the midst of woman and gold. So we can say the object of lust and greed. He's talking to Adhar. Now why a young man? He's telling him all this. Because this is the end of his life. He won't tell it to everybody at that age. But this is the equivalent to somebody who's ready to renounce the world. He knows that he doesn't have much time to live. Therefore, one must be very careful. But monks do not have much to fear. The real sannyasi lives away from woman and gold, the objects of lust and greed. Therefore, through the practice of spiritual discipline, he can always fix his mind on God. True sannyasis, those who are able to devote their minds constantly to God, are like bees which light only on flowers and sip their honey. Those who live in the world, in the midst of objects of lust and greed, may direct their attention to God, but sometimes their minds dwell also on objects of lust and greed. They are like common flies which light on a piece of candy, then on a sore or filth. Always keep your mind fixed on God. This is the final thing he's telling to Adhar on this day. Always keep your mind fixed on God. In the beginning, you must struggle a little. Later on, you will enjoy your pension. So these are really very inspiring words. We may wonder, all of this struggle, what will we get out of it? But we have to have that faith that the fruits will come. We may not know when or why, or how, or what form they'll take, but we have to have that conviction. Thakur is telling us, have that conviction, and that we will not regret it. We lead a spiritual life with great sincerity and with great longing, and there's no possible way that we can regret it. This I have deep conviction regarding this. Thakur tells us, Holy Mother tells us, we see the lives of all these great saints. Really, life becomes blessed that way. So let us stop here. That's the end of that day. And I'll close with our chant. Om Niranjanam Nityamananda Rupam Bhaktanugam Bhatudha Vikraham Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you, everyone, and again, for everyone who has sent good wishes to me. I'm very, very grateful. I thank all of you.